Imagine, if you will, a canvas born from the hushed reverence of a bygone era, steeped in the quiet dignity of the late Victorian age. This was no ordinary painting. It was a whisper from the past, a masterpiece of oil and time that seemed to defy the very imperfections of existence. Its subject, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, gazed out with an expression of profound serenity, her features sculpted by an artist's hand with such delicate precision that she appeared almost to breathe. Her gown, a symphony of deep emerald velvet, cascaded around her, each fold rendered with an almost tactile realism, catching the light as if woven from moonlight itself. The pearls adorning her slender neck gleamed softly, mirroring the gentle luminescence in her eyes. The background was a muted, dreamlike blur of shadowed gardens, hinting at a world of quiet grandeur beyond the frame. Everything about it spoke of an untouched elegance, a moment perfectly preserved, a silent testament to beauty and grace. It was the kind of artwork that demanded not just admiration but contemplation, drawing the viewer into its deep, placid pools of color and emotion. An immediate sense of alluring mystery clung to it, a silent invitation to unravel the secrets held within its varnished surface. Please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the unexplained and forgotten stories. Enter Eleanor Vance, a name synonymous in certain circles with an almost preternatural ability to unearth the hidden narratives behind forgotten relics. Eleanor was more than just an art historian. She was a meticulous archaeologist of aesthetics, an antique dealer whose passion burned with an unwavering intensity for the true, untold stories that lay dormant within historical artifacts. Her discerning eye, honed over decades of quiet study and countless hours spent sifting through the detritus of time, could spot a genuine treasure amidst a sea of trinkets, could perceive the echoes of lives lived in the faintest brushstroke or the subtle patina of age. Her dedication was not merely to monetary value, but to the profound human connection embedded in each piece, a commitment to giving voice to the silent witnesses of history. Her home, a charming Victorian cottage nestled on a cobblestone street, was itself a testament to this love affair with the past. Every room was a curated museum of forgotten elegance, filled with time-worn furniture, stacks of leather-bound books, and curiosities collected from various eras, each item holding a quiet story within its form. It was a space that breathed history, a sanctuary where the past felt tangibly alive, perfectly reflecting the soul of its occupant. It was on a particularly damp and dreary Saturday, amidst the melancholic tableau of a sprawling, forgotten estate sale, that Eleanor first encountered the portrait. The air hung thick with the scent of dust, damp wood, and faded memories, as if the very house was exhaling its last breath. Most attendees buzzed around the larger furniture pieces or sparkling trinkets, oblivious to the unassuming corner where the painting leaned, almost casually against a stack of discarded canvases. It was tucked away, obscured by shadows, and a film of grime that dulled its vibrant hues, presenting itself with a modesty that belied its inherent power. Yet, even in its neglected state, the portrait radiated an undeniable presence. The young woman's gentle, almost melancholic gaze seemed to pierce through the accumulated dust of decades, drawing Eleanor in with an irresistible magnetism. There was an immediate, inexplicable connection that transcended mere aesthetic appreciation. It was a profound intuition, a visceral pull that whispered of something significant, something rare. Despite its humble presentation, the lack of a prominent signature, or any discernible provenance, Eleanor knew, with the certainty of a diviner striking water, that this was no ordinary acquisition. This was a piece destined for her, a silent plea reaching across the centuries. Back in the warm, inviting sanctuary of her home, Eleanor began the meticulous process of restoration. With practiced hands and a reverence bordering on devotion, She carefully cleaned away the layers of accumulated dirt and varnish, revealing the painting's true splendor beneath. The transformation was breathtaking. The colors, once muted and somber, now glowed with an inner light. The greens of the velvet gown deepened, the pearls shimmered with newfound brilliance, and the subject's skin, previously sallow, now possessed a lifelike radiance. She placed the portrait in the most prominent spot in her study, directly opposite her favorite reading chair, where the morning light could illuminate its every intricate detail. For days, Eleanor found herself utterly captivated, losing track of time as she sat and simply observed. She traced the delicate lines of the brushwork with her eyes, marveling at the artist's mastery, the subtle blending of tones, the almost invisible textures. The young woman's expression, a nuanced blend of serenity and a hint of wistful sadness, seemed to deepen with each passing hour, offering new interpretations, new layers of emotion. Eleanor was utterly convinced. She had not merely acquired an antique, but a true forgotten masterpiece, a silent jewel waiting patiently for its moment to shine again. It was late one afternoon as the setting sun cast long golden fingers through the tall windows of her study, illuminating the room in a particularly dramatic fashion, that the first unsettling observation occurred. Eleanor had risen from her chair, a cup of cooling tea in hand, and was admiring the portrait under this specific, almost theatrical lighting. The polished, ornate wooden frame, a testament to Victorian craftsmanship, gleamed with a deep, rich luster, reflecting the warm hues of the room around it. As she shifted her weight, a fleeting anomaly caught the very edge of her peripheral vision within the highly reflective surface of the frame. It was a momentary distortion, a shape that seemed to shimmer into existence and then vanish with impossible speed, a flicker, a blur. She paused, her gaze sharpening, trying to pinpoint what she had seen. Her own reflection, distorted slightly by the convex curve of the wood, was clear enough, as were the muted outlines of the antique lamp and the book-lined shelves behind her. But this had been different, something distinct, something other. She peered closer, tilting her head, but saw nothing amiss. The polished wood simply reflected the room, pristine and unblemished. Eleanor dismissed it with a soft chuckle, attributing it to a trick of the fading light, an optical illusion caused by her own tired eyes, or perhaps merely an overactive imagination stirred by the portrait's potent allure. It was, after all, a beautiful and ancient piece, perfectly capable of playing such subtle games with the mind. The fleeting anomaly, initially dismissed as a mere trick of light, began to assert itself with an unsettling persistence that chipped away at Eleanor's staunch rationality. It wasn't just a shimmer, or the dance of dust motes caught in an errant sunbeam. It was something far more deliberate. In the polished, dark wood of the Victorian frame, a vague, almost translucent face started to appear. It was never quite there when she looked directly, or when the light was perfectly angled, but always at the periphery of her vision, a spectral whisper in the reflective surface. It was distinct, undeniably separate from her own reflection or the familiar contours of her charming, history-filled study. The face would materialize from certain angles, a ghostly impression that seemed to hover just beneath the surface, a silent observer within the very artifact she had so lovingly restored. Each time it manifested, a prickle of unease crawled up her spine, a sensation alien to her usually composed demeanor. Eleanor, a woman whose life was built on meticulous research and tangible evidence, refused to succumb to fanciful notions. Her first instinct was to debunk, to apply every logical explanation her sharp mind could conjure. She meticulously cleaned the ornate frame again, running a soft cloth over every curve and crevice, convinced some residual grime or imperfection was causing the optical illusion. She experimented with the room's lighting, drawing the heavy velvet curtains to block out the harsh afternoon sun, then opening them wide to flood the space with natural light. She tested the portrait under the soft glow of her reading lamp, then the cooler, more direct beam of a spotlight, hoping to expose the trick. She moved the heavy portrait to different walls, convinced the angle of the window or the position of a mirror was creating the phenomenon. She even delved into her extensive library, poring over books on optical illusions, visual perception, and the science of reflections, seeking a scientific explanation for what her eyes were witnessing. Yet each attempt, each rational hypothesis, crumbled under the weight of the recurring, inexplicable phenomenon. The face remained, a silent, unyielding challenge to her understanding of reality. As days bled into nights, the reflected face subtly but undeniably shifted, its features becoming more defined, less like a vague smudge and more like a distinct if ethereal countenance. Eleanor started to discern eyes that seemed to watch her, not with malice, but with a profound, almost desperate intensity. A mouth appeared to form, not quite a smile nor a frown, but something in between, a silent plea, perhaps, or an expression of deep sorrow that resonated with the melancholic beauty of the painted subject, yet was entirely separate from it. It was a different face entirely, younger perhaps, and imbued with an entirely different emotional landscape than the serene woman captured on canvas. The eerie precision of its appearance, always just beyond direct scrutiny, yet undeniably present, began to profoundly disturb Eleanor. The reflection itself, this silent, persistent presence, began to feel like an antagonist, not in a traditional sense, but as a relentless challenger to her rational world. It wasn't overtly hostile, no sudden movements or terrifying distortions, but its very existence was a constant, unsettling pressure, a silent siege on her perception of what was real. It was a mystery that breathed, a secret that watched, and Eleanor found herself in an unwilling battle against an unseen force contained within a gilded frame. This encounter transcended her usual academic pursuits, pushing her into a realm she had always intellectually acknowledged but never truly believed in. The portrait, once a source of aesthetic pleasure, had transformed into a vessel for something inexplicable, something that defied every logical principle she held dear. Her initial skepticism, a cornerstone of her intellectual identity, slowly gave way to a complex mix of morbid curiosity and genuine creeping fear. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, an instinctual alarm bell ringing against the impossible, but intertwined with it was an almost irresistible pull, a profound fascination with the enigma unfolding before her. She found herself drawn to the portrait, compelled to observe, to understand. Eleanor began to document the appearances, not just mentally, but physically. She started sketching what she saw, attempting to capture the elusive features of the reflected face, to give form to the formless. Her sketches were crude at first, then grew more detailed as the face itself became clearer, a testament to her growing obsession. She felt an intense, almost magnetic pull to understand the mystery, to unravel the silent narrative that seemed to emanate from the frame. It was as if the portrait itself was urging her silently to delve deeper, to listen to the whispers of its hidden truth. The first signs of the emotional impact began to manifest in subtle, yet undeniable ways. Eleanor, typically a woman of robust health and calm disposition, started to lose sleep. Her nights were restless, her mind racing with images of the reflected face, replaying its fleeting appearances, trying to decipher its silent message. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by the portrait, its beauty now overshadowed by its chilling secret. A pervasive sense of being watched settled over her, an invisible gaze that followed her even when she wasn't in the same room as the painting. She would glance over her shoulder, convinced she felt a presence, a subtle shift in the air. The once serene beauty of the portrait, which had so captivated her, now carried an undertone of dread. The masterpiece she had so proudly acquired was no longer merely a piece of art. It was a haunting presence, a silent sentinel guarding a secret that was beginning to unravel her very sense of reality, drawing her deeper into its enigmatic embrace. The chilling secret harbored within the ornate frame had irrevocably fractured Eleanor's rational world. Her initial skepticism, a cornerstone of her academic discipline, had crumbled under the relentless, silent gaze of the reflected face. Now driven by a primal need for answers that superseded her fear, Eleanor plunged headlong into the portrait's potential history. Her meticulously organized study, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, transformed into a war room of research. Books on Victorian art history piled high, their brittle pages whispering forgotten tales. She devoured texts on common portrait styles, the societal nuances of the era, and the intricate, often opaque, world of art provenance. Her computer screen glowed late into the night, illuminating her determined face as she cross-referenced auction records, estate inventories, and genealogical archives, attempting to trace the portrait's journey from its creation to her living room. The estate sale, once a dusty memory, became her primary investigative target. She revisited the auction house records, sifting through the sprawling inventory lists that hinted at the property's past inhabitants. Slowly, painstakingly, a fragmented narrative began to emerge. The estate, a grand but decaying Victorian mansion, had belonged to the Ashworths, a family once prominent whose fortunes and reputation had dwindled over generations. Her research unearthed cryptic information, not about the portrait directly, but about the family itself. There were whispers in old town records, fleeting mentions in local historical societies, of a tragic undercurrent to their prosperity. A recurring theme of loss, of unexplained disappearances, seemed to cling to the Ashworth name like the dust in their ancestral home. A lost family member, perhaps, or a scandal quietly erased from public memory, was hinted at in the margins of her findings. The grand, imposing architecture of the estate, she learned, had seen its share of hushed secrets. As Eleanor delved deeper, the spectral face in the portrait's reflection seemed to respond to her progress. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, yet utterly profound to her now attuned senses. When she encountered a particularly vague mention of a sudden, unexplained departure from the Ashworth household in 1888, the reflected eyes seemed to widen fractionally, a silent plea intensifying their sorrowful gaze. If she read about the family's rigid adherence to social decorum, the mouth in the reflection might appear to tighten, a flicker of urgency replacing its usual mournful set. It was as if the face was trying to communicate, to guide her, its silent agony mirroring her growing frustration and determination. The portrait, initially just a beautiful piece of art, was rapidly transforming into a living, breathing historical document, a conduit to a past desperate to be heard. Eleanor began to hypothesize, connecting the disparate threads. Could the reflected face be that of a forgotten servant, caught in the web of the Ashworth secrets, or a jilted lover whose existence was too inconvenient to acknowledge? Perhaps a family member whose very being threatened the carefully constructed facade of Victorian respectability. Each theory, however speculative, felt more tangible than the last. The portrait was no longer just a painting. It was a silent witness, its frame a prison for a forgotten truth. She felt an almost feverish compulsion to unearth the full story, to give voice to the spectral presence that watched her from the polished wood. This consuming obsession, however, came at a cost. Her relationships, once a source of comfort and intellectual sparring, began to fray. Friends noticed her distraction, her hollowed eyes, and the way her conversations invariably circled back to the Victorian portrait. When she cautiously, hesitantly tried to articulate her experiences with the reflected face, their reactions ranged from polite concern to outright dismissal. "Eleanor, you're overworking yourself," one friend suggested gently, while another, more blunt, advised her to take a break from those dusty old things and get some fresh air. They saw an academic on the verge of a breakdown, not a woman on the precipice of an extraordinary discovery. Their inability to comprehend, their rational dismissal of what she knew to be real, left Eleanor feeling profoundly isolated. She was alone in this bizarre, unsettling journey, the only one privy to the portrait's chilling secret. The beautiful antique, once a source of joy, had become a barrier between her and the world she once inhabited. Then, a breakthrough. Deep within a collection of digitized local newspapers from the late 19th century, Eleanor stumbled upon a tiny, almost hidden obituary notice. It was for a Miss Eliza Finch, listed simply as a former resident of the Ashworth estate, who passed away suddenly in 1889. The notice was unusually brief, almost cursory, especially for a time when death notices often detailed lineage and virtues. Further digging, cross-referencing with census records and parish registers, revealed something even more unsettling. Eliza Finch was never officially accounted for in the Ashworth family records after that date. No burial plot was listed, no further mention of her existence. It was as if she had simply vanished from the face of the earth, her brief obituary serving as a flimsy curtain over a deeper, darker truth. A scandal. A death quietly swept under the rug. Involving a young woman named Eliza, the name resonated with an almost physical force within Eleanor, a cold shiver tracing its way down her spine. The reflected face, when she next looked, seemed to hold a newfound intensity, a desperate, silent plea for recognition now imbued with a name, Eliza. The name Eliza now echoed in Eleanor's mind, a fragile whisper that seemed to ripple from the ornate frame of the Victorian portrait. It was no longer just a visual anomaly, a trick of light, or an overactive imagination. The subtle manifestations around the painting had intensified, creeping beyond the purely optical and into the realm of the undeniable. As she sat in her study late one evening, poring over more historical documents, a distinct chill descended not from a draft, but emanating directly from the corner where the portrait hung. It was a cold that seemed to sink into her bones, independent of the room's ambient temperature. Then came the fleeting sense, faint and elusive, like the ghost of lavender and damp earth, aromas that would materialize and dissipate as quickly as they appeared, leaving Eleanor to wonder if her mind was playing tricks or if some spectral memory was stirring in the air. Most unsettling of all were the whispers. They were barely audible, like the rustling of old silk or the sigh of a forgotten breeze, carrying no discernible words, but imbued with a profound sense of sorrow and urgency. They were only ever present when she was utterly alone, the house silent around her, making her question her sanity even as her heart pounded with a terrifying certainty. Eleanor grappled fiercely with the reality of what she was experiencing, her rational mind honed by years of academic discipline and a steadfast belief in empirical evidence, fought tooth and nail against the supernatural intrusion. She was a woman of logic, of facts, of documented history, ghosts, spirits, ethereal communications. These were the stuff of fiction, not the lived experience of a respected art historian. The psychological stress was immense, a constant gnawing battle between what her senses reported and what her intellect refused to accept. Sleep became a luxury, haunted by vivid dreams of a young woman's tear-streaked face and the suffocating weight of an untold secret. She questioned her sanity relentlessly, wondering if the isolation and obsessive research had finally broken her. Yet, she could not deny the evidence. The cold spots were real, the sense palpable, the whispers a chilling presence that defied any logical explanation. The portrait had opened a door, and something was desperately trying to step through. The reflected face, now imbued with Eliza's name, began to appear more frequently, its features clearer, more defined. It was no longer a vague impression, but a distinct countenance of profound sorrow, its eyes wide with a desperate plea. Its expressions had become more urgent, its gaze intense, almost trying to communicate a specific message. Sometimes its eyes would seem to flicker towards a particular detail in the portrait itself, then back to Eleanor, as if guiding her. Other times its gaze would drift towards the corner of the room, or a specific book on her shelf, a silent spectral finger pointing the way. Eleanor felt an overwhelming pressure, a sense of being directed, a silent conversation unfolding between the living and the spectral. She started to meticulously sketch the face, trying to capture the nuances of its expressions, convinced that Eliza was trying to tell her something vital, something only she could decipher. Following these subtle spectral cues, Eleanor turned her intense scrutiny from the frame to the portrait itself. She examined every brushstroke, every shadow, every minute detail of the painted subject's attire and background. For days she pored over the canvas under various lights, using magnifying glasses, even an old antique dealer's UV lamp. It was painstaking work, a testament to her meticulous nature and newfound desperate hope. Then, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, she found it. Tucked away in the folds of the painted subject's voluminous skirt, almost blending into the dark fabric, was a tiny embroidered symbol. It wasn't a common Victorian motif. It was a delicate, almost stylized representation of a single forget-me-not flower, stitched with threads so fine they mimicked paint. It was barely discernible, a detail no casual observer would ever notice, clearly intended to be hidden in plain sight. The discovery sent a jolt through Eleanor. She immediately remembered the old newspaper clipping, the brief obituary for Eliza Finch. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her as she recalled a specific, almost throwaway line in a rediscovered letter from the Ashworth family archives, a letter written by a distant cousin lamenting poor Eliza and her beloved forget-me-nots. The flower was a known symbol of remembrance and loyalty, often exchanged between lovers or close friends. This hidden detail, this tiny embroidered flower, was a direct, undeniable connection to Eliza. It was a secret mark, a silent testament to her presence, woven into the very fabric of the painting that supposedly had nothing to do with her. The painted subject, serene and beautiful, held a secret that was not her own. A chilling, profound revelation dawned upon Eleanor, causing her to gasp aloud in the silent room. The woman painted in the portrait, the one whose tranquil gaze had initially captivated her, was not Eliza. The hidden forget-me-not, Eliza's personal symbol, was not worn by the painted subject, but hidden within her dress, a secret placed there by someone else, perhaps the artist, perhaps Eliza herself, in a desperate act of defiance or communication. The portrait was a cover-up, a beautiful distraction. It was a masterpiece of deception, designed to draw attention away from the true tragedy it silently encompassed. And the reflected face, the tormented, urgent visage that watched her from the polished wood, was Eliza. Trapped within the frame, not as the subject but as the ghost of the secret it concealed, Eliza had been trying to tell her story all along, using the only voice she had left, a reflection, a whisper, a silent, desperate plea for justice from beyond the veil. The beautiful antique was not just a conduit to the past, it was a prison, and Eliza was its tormented inhabitant. The chilling realization settled upon Eleanor with the weight of a century of injustice. The beautiful, serene woman captured in oil was merely a diversion, a painted veil. The true subject, the tormented soul, was the spectral face that flickered in the polished frame, the face of Eliza Finch. Eleanor now understood with absolute certainty that Eliza was not merely a historical footnote, but a living, suffering presence, trapped within the confines of the ornate wood, desperately seeking to reveal her truth. The contrast was agonizing. The placid, almost smiling countenance of the painted lady, utterly oblivious, a silent accomplice to the deception, against the ever-present anguish etched into Eliza's reflected features. Her eyes, though ethereal, burned with a sorrow that transcended time, a silent scream imprisoned behind a glass-like barrier. Eleanor felt a profound sense of empathy, a connection that went beyond academic curiosity, forging an unbreakable bond with the forgotten spirit. Guided by Eliza's increasingly explicit prompts, a subtle tilt of the head in the reflection towards an old atlas, a momentary intensification of her gaze on a faded family crest Eleanor had sketched, Eleanor delved deeper into the Ashworth family's labyrinthine history. She sifted through dusty parish registers, scanned microfilm society columns, and even transcribed fragments from a distant relative's published memoirs. Eliza's story began to emerge, not as a clear narrative, but as a mosaic of whispers and obscured facts. Eliza Finch was indeed a young woman of humble origins, a distant cousin, perhaps, brought into the grand Ashworth estate not as a servant, but as a companion for the ailing matriarch, a position that offered a veneer of respectability while keeping her tethered to the family's whims. She was innocent, perhaps naive, a light in the dark corridors of the imposing house, and tragically she became entangled in a web of ambition and entitlement, a dark secret that threatened to unravel the powerful family's carefully constructed public image. The villain of Eliza's tragedy began to take shape through Eleanor's relentless research. All clues pointed to Arthur Ashworth, the patriarch's eldest son, a man lauded in society pages as a burgeoning industrialist and a future political hopeful. However, mentions of his volatile temper, his ruthless business dealings, and a brief, hushed scandal involving a misunderstanding with a housemaid years prior painted a far more sinister picture. Arthur, Eleanor surmised, was a man who valued reputation above all else, capable of orchestrating a disappearance, of silencing any voice that threatened his ascent. He was the architect of Eliza's demise, the one who had buried her truth beneath layers of deceit and commissioned a beautiful lie to distract from the ugliness he had wrought. The very thought of his calculating cruelty sent shivers down Eleanor's spine, cementing her resolve to expose him, even across the chasm of time. As Eleanor's understanding deepened, so too did Eliza's desperate attempts to communicate. The manifestations around the portrait became almost unbearable in their intensity. The reflection would no longer merely flicker, it would distort, ripple like water, and sometimes, for a fleeting, terrifying second, Eliza's mouth would appear to form words, though no sound ever escaped. Eleanor would lean in close, her breath catching in her throat, trying to decipher the silent pleas. The air around the portrait would grow heavy, thick with an unspoken urgency, and the cold spots would solidify into a palpable presence, a desperate yearning emanating from the frame itself. Eleanor felt Eliza's frustration, her agony, her century-long plea for recognition and justice, almost as if it were her own. The tension in the room was a constant vibrating hum, a testament to the spirit's unwavering will to be heard. Overcoming the initial fear that had once paralyzed her, Eleanor's connection to Eliza deepened into a profound sense of duty. Her academic curiosity, once the primary driver, had transformed into a fierce, unwavering commitment. She was no longer merely an art historian investigating a peculiar anomaly. She was Eliza's advocate, her last hope. The portrait was no longer just an antique. It was a sacred trust. Eleanor felt a moral imperative, a powerful compulsion to be Eliza's voice, to expose the truth that had been so meticulously buried for over a century. The thought of letting Eliza remain unheard, trapped in that silent torment, was now unthinkable. Eleanor knew with every fiber of her being that she would stop at nothing to bring Eliza's story to light, to finally grant her the peace she deserved. In the midst of this deepening resolve, a new lead, more dangerous and tangible than any before, emerged from the shadows of Eleanor's research. While poring over an obscure architectural blueprint of the Ashworth estate, dating back to the late 1880s, Eleanor noticed a discrepancy. A small, unlabeled room, not present in later renovations, was indicated in a rarely accessed wing, tucked away behind a servant's stairwell. It was a space designed for concealment, a void in the architectural logic. Simultaneously, an old inventory list mentioned a unique, intricately carved wooden jewelry box, a gift from Arthur to his mother, which mysteriously vanished from family records around the same time as Eliza's disappearance. The confluence of these two clues, a hidden room and a missing object, struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. The hidden room, she instinctively knew, held a sinister purpose, and the jewelry box perhaps held a final desperate message from Eliza. This clue promised to be the key, the definitive link to the full, horrific truth, and it pointed directly back to the now derelict Ashworth estate itself. The danger was palpable, but so was the promise of answers. The reflected face, when she next looked, seemed to hold a newfound intensity, a desperate, silent plea for recognition now imbued with a name, Eliza. The revelation of Eliza Finch's existence and her abrupt disappearance from the historical record solidified Eleanor's conviction. This was no mere trick of light, no figment of an overactive imagination. This was a soul, trapped and yearning, using a centuries-old portrait as its final, desperate message in a bottle. The burden of Eliza's unspoken tragedy settled heavily upon Eleanor's shoulders, transforming her academic pursuit into a sacred quest. She knew with an unwavering certainty that defied all logic that the key to Eliza's full story lay within the decaying walls of the very estate where her life had tragically concluded. The decision to visit the Ashworth estate was not made lightly. It was a place steeped in whispers and shadows, a monument to a powerful family's forgotten secrets. Eleanor felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach, a primal fear of confronting the spectral echoes of past horrors. Yet Eliza's reflective gaze, now more persistent and urgent than ever, compelled her forward. It was a silent, powerful magnetism drawing her towards the source of the agony. She spent days meticulously planning, cross-referencing old maps with current satellite imagery, identifying potential hidden passages or overlooked outbuildings hinted at in the vague historical accounts. She packed a sturdy bag with essentials: a powerful flashlight, a small digital recorder, a camera, and a worn leather-bound notebook. She would face the past, not as a thrill-seeker, but as a historian armed with a purpose. The journey to the estate was a descent into a forgotten world. The paved roads eventually gave way to crumbling asphalt, then to a dirt track overgrown with weeds and brambles. The landscape grew increasingly desolate, the trees forming a dense, skeletal canopy that blocked out the sun. Finally, through a parting in the dense foliage, the Ashworth estate loomed into view. It was a grand, imposing structure, even in its state of profound decay. Gargoyles with crumbling faces leered from the cornices, their stone eyes vacant, staring out over a choked wilderness that had once been meticulously manicured gardens. Windows, opaque with grime and age, resembled hollowed eye sockets reflecting nothing but the gray sky. The very air around the property felt heavy, thick with the silence of decades of neglect, punctuated only by the mournful creak of unseen branches in the wind. A sense of profound melancholy hung about the place, a palpable sorrow that seemed to seep from the very stones. Eleanor took a deep, fortifying breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was it. Pushing open the massive rusted iron gates, which groaned in protest as if resenting the intrusion, Eleanor stepped onto the overgrown drive. The crunch of dried leaves and twigs under her boots was shockingly loud in the oppressive stillness. The front door, once a majestic entrance, hung ajar, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. Inside, the air was cold and stagnant, thick with the scent of dust, damp and decay. Cobwebs like tattered shrouds draped every surface. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every faint breeze. Almost immediately, Eleanor felt Eliza's presence intensify. A distinct cold spot settled around her, raising goosebumps on her arms. A faint whisper, almost imperceptible, seemed to brush past her ear, guiding her gaze towards a specific dark corridor. It wasn't hostile, but desperate, a palpable yearning. Guided by the spectral presence, Eleanor moved through the labyrinthine corridors. She felt an inexplicable pull towards the servants' quarters, a part of the house often overlooked in grand historical narratives. The whispers grew clearer, not actual words, but a sensation of direction, a subtle pressure urging her forward. She passed dusty pantries, a cavernous, long-abandoned kitchen, and a narrow, winding back staircase. Eliza's presence was strongest in a small, forgotten room off a secondary landing, a room that seemed to have been a maid's quarters, humble and stark. Here, the air was almost icy, and the reflection of Eliza in the small, compact mirror Eleanor carried flickered with an agitated urgency. It pointed, not with a finger, but with an almost invisible shift in its spectral gaze towards a section of the wall beside a defunct fireplace. Eleanor approached cautiously, running her gloved hand over the rough plaster. It felt solid, unremarkable, but Eliza's reflected face pulsed with a desperate energy. Eleanor pressed harder, feeling for any give, any subtle seam. Her fingers brushed against a barely discernible line, hidden beneath layers of old paint and grime. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed, and a small, almost invisible panel swung inward with a faint groan, revealing a dark, shallow cavity within the wall. Inside, nestled amongst crumbling mortar and decades of dust, lay a small, tarnished silver locket and a tightly bound yellow journal. The locket was engraved with the initials E.F., Eliza Finch. With trembling hands, Eleanor retrieved the journal. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the elegant script was still legible. As she began to read, huddled in the cold, silent room, the full, horrifying truth of Eliza's fate unfurled before her. The journal was Eliza's own, a secret chronicle of her life as a young maid in the Ashworth household. It detailed a clandestine affair with the patriarch's eldest son, a passionate but ultimately doomed romance. When Eliza became pregnant, the family's carefully constructed facade of respectability threatened to shatter. The journal chillingly described how Eliza was confined to this very room, her pleas for her lover ignored, her existence erased. She was not murdered in a violent act, but slowly, psychologically broken, starved of hope and human connection until she perished, her body discreetly disposed of, her memory wiped clean. The portrait, Eleanor now understood with a sickening clarity, was commissioned not merely as a beautiful piece of art, but as a deliberate distraction, a magnificent lie designed to draw attention away from the dark secret hidden within the estate's walls. A beautiful woman whose serene gaze was meant to represent the Ashworth family's untarnished virtue, a stark contrast to the tragic reality of Eliza's hidden suffering. The painted subject was a ghost of a different kind, a phantom of respectability. As Eleanor finished reading, tears streaming down her face, the reflection of Eliza in the compact mirror underwent a profound transformation. The sorrow was still there, a deep, abiding pain that centuries could not erase. But beneath it, a new emotion flickered, a fragile, nascent hope. The desperate urgency in her spectral eyes softened, replaced by a quiet, almost reverent gratitude. There was a desperate longing for justice, yes, but also a profound sense of having finally been heard, of her truth being brought into the light after so long in the suffocating darkness. It was a silent, powerful testament to the enduring human need for remembrance, even from beyond the veil. Eleanor returned to her charming, history-filled home, the weight of Eliza's story pressing heavily upon her soul. The journey back was a blur of quiet contemplation, the journal clutched tightly in one hand, the tarnished locket in the other. She barely registered the familiar streets, her mind consumed by the tragedy she had unearthed. Upon entering her study, she moved with a purpose born of sorrow and resolve. Carefully, almost reverently, she placed the journal and the locket on the small antique table directly beneath the Victorian portrait. The painted subject, once merely a beautiful, serene face, now seemed to gaze down with an ironic, almost mocking innocence, a stark contrast to the brutal truth Eliza's words had laid bare. As the physical evidence of Eliza's suffering rested beneath its silent, painted lie, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Eleanor felt a profound chill, not of fear, but of immense, sorrowful energy radiating from the frame. She looked up, her gaze drawn to the polished wood, and there in the reflection Eliza appeared. This time her features were startlingly clear, almost tangible, as if the veil between worlds had thinned to transparency. Her eyes, pools of deep, ancient pain, locked with Eleanor's. A silent scream seemed to emanate from her spectral form, a wordless communication of the agony she had endured, the betrayal, the suffocating loneliness of her final days. Eleanor felt it all, a crushing wave of emotion that was not entirely her own, a direct download of Eliza's torment. It was an overwhelming, visceral experience, a profound communion across the centuries. She saw Eliza's young, hopeful face, full of naive love, slowly wither under the weight of her confinement, the cruel indifference of those who sought to silence her. She felt the chill of the forgotten room, the gnawing hunger, the desperate pleas for a lover who never came, the shattering realization that her life was deemed expendable for the sake of reputation. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, not just for Eliza, but for the countless forgotten voices of history, silenced by power and prejudice. The injustice of it all burned within her. She knew, with an absolute certainty that transcended logic, that this truth could not, would not, remain buried. She looked directly into Eliza's spectral eyes, her voice hoarse with emotion but firm with conviction. "I hear you, Eliza," she whispered, her words echoing in the suddenly still room. "I promise you, your story will be told. They will know what happened. You will not be forgotten." It was more than just a promise. It was a sacred vow, a declaration of war against the historical narrative that had sought to erase Eliza's very existence. Eleanor, the meticulous art historian, had become an unlikely champion for a ghost, her rational mind fully embracing the impossible. Her initial curiosity had long since transformed into a profound sense of duty, a deep-seated need to right a century-old wrong, regardless of the challenges or the skepticism she might face. She understood now that this was Eliza's final communication, her last, desperate plea for recognition and peace channeled through the only person who had truly seen her. As Eleanor verbalized her commitment, a powerful, almost ethereal shift occurred. The heavy atmosphere in the room seemed to lighten, the oppressive sorrow lifting like a morning mist. Eliza's reflection, which had been so intensely clear, began to soften, to shimmer. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her spectral lips, a fleeting expression of profound relief and gratitude. Then a soft, warm light, like the gentle glow of a distant dawn, emanated from the ornate wooden frame, momentarily bathing the study in a tender radiance. It was a silent, beautiful farewell, a moment of profound release. Eliza's spirit, having finally delivered her truth, having found her voice through Eleanor, was at peace. The reflection faded slowly, gracefully, until only the polished wood and its mundane reflections of the room remained. The presence, so palpable moments before, dissolved, leaving behind a lingering sense of quiet calm. The truth, once a carefully guarded secret, was now out. The historical villain, the patriarch's eldest son, and the entire Ashworth family's elaborate cover-up, meticulously constructed and maintained for generations, was finally exposed. Though long dead, their carefully cultivated legacy of respectability was irrevocably shattered. Justice, in a historical and spiritual sense, had finally been served, a century and a half too late for Eliza, but not too late for her story. The portrait which had initiated this incredible journey now stood on the table, its painted subject serene as ever. But for Eleanor, it was no longer merely a beautiful piece of Victorian art. The serene gaze of the painted woman, once a symbol of the Ashworth family's untarnished virtue, was now a poignant reminder of the lie it represented, a testament to the hidden suffering it concealed. The portrait was transformed, imbued with a deeper, more profound meaning. It was a silent witness, a relic of both beauty and brutality, a canvas that held not one but two stories, the one painted on its surface and the one etched into its very essence by Eliza's tormented spirit. Eleanor saw it not as a simple object but as a gateway to a forgotten tragedy, a powerful symbol of a life unjustly taken and a truth desperately seeking the light. It was a monument to Eliza Finch, a young woman whose existence had been erased, but whose spirit had found a way to speak, to demand remembrance, through the most unexpected of mediums. The beauty of the portrait was now intertwined with the heartbreak of its secret, making it a masterpiece not just of art, but of history, a silent scream against the injustices of the past. Eleanor knew her work was far from over. This was merely the beginning of Eliza's true legacy. Eleanor returned from the desolate Ashworth estate, the journal and locket clutched tight, her mind reeling with the weight of Eliza's untold suffering. The spectral gratitude she had witnessed was a silent plea, a sacred trust. Over the next several weeks, Eleanor dedicated herself entirely to Eliza's story. She meticulously transcribed Eliza's journal, cross-referencing every detail with existing historical records, meticulously piecing together the fragments of a life deliberately erased. She sought out birth and death records, property deeds, and even obscure social columns from the Victorian era, all to corroborate Eliza's chilling narrative. The silver locket, engraved with EF, became a tangible anchor, a small, cold piece of evidence that spoke volumes. Eleanor didn't just write an academic paper, she crafted a compelling narrative, infused with the emotional weight of Eliza's words, the raw pain of her betrayal, and the crushing injustice of her silent demise. She meticulously documented the portrait's origins, its deliberate commissioning, and its role as a beautiful, deceptive shroud over a horrific family secret. Her work was a testament to the power of a forgotten voice brought to life through dedicated historical detective work. Eleanor initially presented her findings to a select group of trusted colleagues, anticipating skepticism, perhaps even ridicule. To her surprise, the detailed research, the compelling narrative, and the undeniable physical evidence, the locket and Eliza's own words, resonated profoundly. The story, initially published in a respected historical journal, quickly gained traction. Soon, a major national newspaper picked it up, followed by documentaries and popular history podcasts. Eliza Finch, a name meticulously scrubbed from history, was suddenly on everyone's lips. The public was captivated by the tragic romance, the shocking cover-up by a prominent Victorian family, and the ghostly intervention that led to the truth's unraveling. Eleanor found herself giving interviews, her quiet life as an art historian transformed. The validation was immense, not just for her own sanity, but for Eliza. Her name, once synonymous with erasure, was now spoken with empathy and remembrance. The long overdue justice, though centuries delayed, finally arrived, washing over the collective consciousness like a cleansing tide. The Ashworth family's carefully constructed legacy of virtue crumbled under the weight of Eliza's rediscovered truth, a powerful lesson that history, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to reveal its secrets. The Victorian portrait, once admired for its aesthetic beauty and perceived serenity, underwent a profound recontextualization. It was no longer merely an antique. It became an exhibit, a powerful artifact displayed with a detailed plaque recounting Eliza Finch's tragic story. The painting of the unnamed serene woman whose gaze had once seemed so gentle now bore the weight of its deceit. Visitors to the exhibition didn't just see a beautiful work of art. They saw a symbol of hidden truths, of forgotten voices screaming silently from the past. They saw the tangible evidence of human cruelty and the enduring power of a secret kept. The ornate frame, once a mere decorative element, now represented Eliza's prison, a gilded cage for a tormented soul. It stood as a stark reminder that what appears perfect on the surface can often conceal the darkest, most unsettling realities. The portrait, in its new iteration, became a poignant testament to the fact that history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it is whispered by the victims, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. It was a beacon for all those lost narratives, a promise that no story, however small or suppressed, is ever truly forgotten. The journey with Eliza had irrevocably changed Eleanor Vance. She was still the meticulous art historian, her discerning eye sharper than ever, but her perspective had broadened immeasurably. She had walked the line between the rational and the inexplicable, had confronted her own skepticism, and emerged with a profound respect for the unseen forces that shape our understanding of the past. Her initial fear had morphed into a fierce advocacy, her curiosity into a deep empathy. Eleanor became a champion for the voiceless, driven by a new understanding that historical research wasn't just about dates and facts, but about the human stories, the emotions, and the injustices that echoed through time. Her work on Eliza's story had not only cemented her reputation as an exceptional historian, but had also transformed her into a bridge between worlds, a conduit for truths long suppressed. Her understanding of beauty now encompassed a deeper, more complex appreciation for the stories hidden beneath the surface, a recognition that true historical understanding required an openness to all possibilities, even those that defied conventional explanation. She no longer simply studied history. She felt it, breathed it, and allowed it to guide her. Eliza's story serves as a powerful, haunting reminder that history is not merely a collection of dusty facts, but a living tapestry woven with triumphs and tragedies, with voices that deserve to be heard even if they whisper from beyond the grave. It underscores the profound importance of listening, truly listening, to the subtle echoes of the past, to the narratives that have been deliberately silenced or conveniently forgotten. It speaks to the immense courage it takes to confront uncomfortable truths, to challenge established narratives, and to stand as an advocate for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The enduring human need for justice and remembrance, even across centuries, is a testament to our shared humanity. Eliza's tale teaches us that beauty, however exquisite, can sometimes hide the darkest, most unsettling secrets, and that true understanding often requires us to look beyond the surface, to question what we see, and to seek the hidden reflections of truth. It reminds us that every artifact, every old house, every forgotten portrait might hold a story waiting to be told, a plea for remembrance. What forgotten stories do you think still hide in plain sight, waiting for a dedicated soul to uncover their truth? Share your thoughts, your theories, or perhaps even your own chilling encounters with history's whispers in the comments below. If you found Eliza's story as captivating and as profoundly moving as we did, if it sparked a flicker of curiosity about the unexplained and the forgotten, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into historical mysteries and spectral encounters, and click that bell icon so you don't miss our next journey into the enigmatic corners of the past. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these incredible stories to light, ensuring that no voice, no matter how long silenced, is ever truly forgotten. Join us again as we peel back the layers of time, seeking the truths that linger just beyond our sight.